All right, thank you for coming to More Than MVPA. I hope you enjoy this presentation. I'm Alex Adams. I just found out actually just the other day that I'll be starting a new profession or position at Austin Peay State University in Tennessee, teaching physical education teacher major. So that's super exciting. Currently in my last year of my doctorate, and besides being a teacher and being a teacher for 12 years now, my favorite role is being dad and being husband, and those I think are my most important roles. But that's who I am, and I'm going to go over how we can use heart rate monitors in non-traditional ways. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but specifically, we're going to talk about how we can learn how to assess ambient heart rate, delta heart rate, recovery heart rate, and max heart rate, maximal heart rate. And these are standards we'll be working on. Most of them are high school level standards. There are some middle school ones that we'll hit on here. But I don't know if you can relate to this, but I remember watching a PBS documentary from this guy here, Paul Zerentowski, and his TEDx talk, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, right when I started teaching, of how this person started using heart rate monitors in Naperville, Illinois, and how it just redefined how he structured his physical education program. He's, by using heart rate monitors, students were more motivated. He changed how students were participating. Instead of doing 11-on-11 soccer game, for instance, he started doing 3-on-3, just making sure that they could get their MVPA up, right? And, I was lucky enough to talk to Paul, get to meet him, and I read the book Spark, and I think I was hooked. I was like, okay, I want to teach like this, or I want to redefine some of the focus of my teaching. And I was like, all right, I want to get heart rate monitors, and it was exciting. I guess it was a game changer for me and my students. You can see some of them here, and they just really got into it. They were more excited to work. We could do workouts before, if we did any sort of cardiovascular exercise. It was okay. But when we had the heart rate monitors, now it's like, oh my goodness, I got to get into the red, or I got to, it was a challenge. And it was a great motivation tool. And, in between rounds, they would, this we're doing a Tabata here, they would just be, checking their heart rate monitor, checking their data. And it was a great, great tool. It was also very helpful because it helped normalize. I'm not a big fan of grading on effort. How do you measure effort? But I will say using MVPA is a lot better than some of our other measures that we use. And here you can see two students. This is the Polar. That's what I use. I have Polar equipment. And can you tell which one of these students is my athlete? Which one would we label an athlete, I guess? And I don't know if you can tell right off the bat, but my top one had the fastest mile time here. And you might not be able to tell that, because if you look at this person, you can tell they are working a lot harder during this class period. But my athlete with the highest mile time, they're not working as hard. And so sometimes it helped motivate even my higher end students to, wow, I guess I wasn't really pushing myself. And students who I thought weren't really trying that hard, actually, wow, you were pushing yourself, even though maybe your mile time or your pacer score. And so it really reshaped the way I thought about effort. And if anything, it allowed us to have conversations, and better conversations about, how you're doing, how you're feeling, And so to me, it was a great teaching tool. great motivation tool. But I came to this point that I was like, man, I want to do more with this. There's some great technology here. How can we use them for learning? And I started asking this question is, just how can we use them to measure cardiovascular fitness? And while the mile run is an okay measure, pacers, in my opinion, a little bit better, none of my students really ever, as a whole, enjoyed doing those assessments. I don't know about your students, but my students were not thrilled to do the pacer or the mile run. It wasn't something they looked forward to. And so that's where I realized, man, we can do so much more with these heart rate monitors. And I want to pause just real quick that, even if you don't have heart rate monitors, you could still use most of these protocols that we're going to go over. They work even if you learn how to take a pulse, and we'll talk about that later. But just heart rate monitors helps facilitate some of these protocols, assessments to make it go a little smoother. All right, so the first one we're going to talk about is ambient heart rate. All right, so ambient heart rate is your body at rest. Now, usually what we think of ambient heart rate, we call resting heart rate, but truly resting heart rate is when your body, as soon as it wakes up, especially before you even get out of bed, and so I would have my students, we would do resting heart rate. Some we'd learn how to take it on their pulse. Some had it on their phone. They had an app they could use. And you say, as soon as you wake up for 5 days in a row, let's measure your resting heart rate. But truly, if you're in class, you're not measuring your resting heart rate. You're measuring your ambient heart rate, and it's just your body at rest or whatever position you're in. You can have a standing ambient heart rate or a sitting ambient heart rate. And so it's important to just educate our students too that there's a difference. And so we'd go over that. And then we'd practice taking our ambient heart rate. And we take three different readings, and we would just average it. And it's real simple to do. Some students chose to do a sitting or lying down ambient heart rate. Some chose to do a standing ambient heart rate. I let them choose. The biggest thing is if we're going to use it as an assessment, it had to be universal. Like, so if you're always doing a standing ambient heart rate, make sure you're always doing a standing ambient heart rate. Or just understand that your standing ambient heart rate is going to be different than your sitting or lying down ambient heart rate. Okay. And there's lots of things that affect ambient heart rate. It's colder outside, or your heart rate will go down, or it's hotter. Hydration levels will affect that. Emotions, right? If you're scared, think of us, your heart might beat a little faster, but your body's not really getting the benefit of a full cardiovascular workout. And then body positions, music. Music typically actually doesn't make a huge change, but we would have, we play hard music and say, okay, was there a change? And some would say, no change. We play classical music. Some would say, oh, the big thing is that we've tried to get is that things affect people differently. And so they learn to appreciate that, oh, wow, when I listen to music, or when I'm sad, my heart rate drops, or when I'm scared, my heart rate really increases, where some people, they felt maybe scared or anxious, and it didn't really affect them as much. And so they just learned how certain stressors really affected that. And we would try to really practice some of these. We would do some breathing exercises, and that helps kind of connect. They would see that if I practice breathing, my heart rate drops, and they can see that change. We do different body positions and just notice, what happens, even from, lying down on the ground versus, your feet flat and then elevating your feet. What do you notice that happens? And so just noticing those differences, I think really helps our students appreciate and notice that we're not all the same. And, we try to be like, oh, we can measure everyone exactly the same. And I don't know if that's always the best principle or a policy, but and this is good too. I like doing this because Really, ambient heart rate doesn't change too much with drinking ice water. It will maybe a little bit drop a little bit because you're increasing your volume, right? Um, but you're not going to see really a change right then and there. You might see more. What we then do is that's an opportunity to talk about really it's hydration that really matters in the last 24 hours. That's really going to affect your heart rate. So, watch your hydration levels in the next 24 hours and then, measure see if there's a change with the ambient heart rate. Now, this one was really fun. I think this is when we would do this with my students. This is like whoa, they would notice a huge change or just a significant change is, we'd either go outside and stand, and if it was hot out, we'd stand in the hot sun and notice a difference, watch our heart rate elevate. I did this during the winter months, so I had a whole bunch of clothes that they would put on, a whole bunch of jackets. But the cold towel, I would freeze these towels and then they would put them around their neck and measure for the next 2-3 minutes. And it would watch just their heart rates drop almost 10 beats, some of them. And it's like, wow, man, this is just a cold towel, how important that is. And it helps, see the importance of some of these things, right? And sometimes they take for granted that we had a cross country team and some of them wouldn't think about hydrating or, worrying about what the heat would do to them. And so this helps them kind of, a lot of students think they're invincible, right? So this helps give them some, some visual evidence and you can just see how things interact, certain stressors interact. And all right, so that's ambient heart rate. So now we'll talk about delta heart rate. So delta heart rate is just simply, it's a change in body position. So it's the measure of your heart rate, I should say, change in body position. And over here on the right, you can see that it'll look something like this. We usually measure it over 2 minutes. And this is someone lying down and then they stand up and, this is the response, right? To stand up, that's going to cause your heart rate to elevate, but then it's going to come back down, right? If you're just standing still. And so anyway, so we call this your delta heart rate. And like ambient heart rate and delta heart rate, with training, it improves. It's an indication of our fitness level. Okay. And like I said, it's real simple. What we would do is they lie down for 2 minutes. They record their lowest value. Okay. We call this their P value, a prone position. And then they would stand up for 2 minutes and then record their value. So this 0 is right here on the bottom here. This is their P, their starting P, 1 minute, 2 minutes. So they should see a similar graph happen. And that would give them their delta heart rate. And like I said, we can use it to kind of indicate fitness level. And like I said, it'll improve as with training. Usually anything below 20 is considered pretty good. And really, it's also an opportunity to have conversations with my students. So I remember I had a student that was regularly below 10 beats per minute at a delta heart rate, always around 10 or 8. And all of a sudden, he was at like 36. And what's going on? Is pretty athletic person, pretty fit person. Turns out that he was on drugs, coffee. He started drinking coffee, I should say. And his girlfriend had broken up with him, or like, what was it? They actually, she was breaking up with him, but he hadn't officially known yet, but knew it was coming. But everyone, and so it's like he was stressed out, drinking coffee, and so it was like, wow, hey, you got a lot of stress in your life right now. And adding coffee might not be the best thing too. And so I help kind of give some, or man, I got to deal with this stress. This stress is affecting me. It's affecting other aspects of just, who I am. And so it allowed to have good conversations. And so it's just another kind of way, another data point. This is actual what it'll look like. Once again, I use the Polar GoFit software, and you can see this is them lying down, pops up here. And then it's you know, we'd measure it after 2 minutes, and that change, okay, that difference, we want that difference to be a small difference here from that 2 minutes from this bottom here to when it comes back down. The smaller, the better for delta heart rate, right? Okay, so the next one is recovery heart rate, okay? And this is just your body's after exercise. It's your heart, your body's ability to get back down to its ambient heart rate or to its resting level, right? Not resting heart rate, right? Because that's only right when we wake up, but more of to our ambient heart rate, right? And the big thing is we're looking at steepness. So of these two graphs, can you tell which one has a better recovery heart rate? Would you say on the left or would you say on the right? Well, the left does. It's really, no, if you notice it, we're really looking for this cliff dive here, right? So they're recovering faster. So the bigger here for recovery, the better. And just like delta and ambient, it improves with training. It can help us indicate overall fitness level. Over here on the right, you can see it's a little slower, right? It's not this giant cliff, right? That's a good sign. Okay, that's a strong recovery heart rate. Okay, and so we can kind of see just that response, right? Some other terms that's important to know. Technically, we're really worried just about intra recovery. You know, the heart rate to get back within one workout session. We don't really talk about inter recovery. You know, your heart rate in between different workout sessions, different days, stuff like that. But technically, it's an intra recovery heart rate. Talk about peak heart rate. That's just the highest heart rate that you achieve during your workout segment. Not your max heart rate. That's different, right? Okay, or your sub-max heart rate. But your peak heart rate is just, you know, what's the highest you were able to get your heart rate during your workout session. And mindful recovery, just that concept of, okay, I'm going to really focus on trying to get my heart rate down, relax, close my eyes, deep breathing, stop moving. It's also a passive, what's it called, passive recovery. So here's our protocol for doing recovery heart rate. You exercise for 5 minutes. Notice your peak heart rate. Now, really, we want to notice their peak heart rate right when they stop. Okay, at the end of that 5 minutes. Okay, and for our protocol, when we had our heart rate lab days, we would record just for 1 minute. The first time we did this, we would do it for 2 minutes, and we would do it twice so they could practice. We do different tests, different exercises, just to see if there's any difference. And all you're doing is you're taking this peak heart rate, and then at 1 minute, whatever it is, you're subtracting it to, and that is your recovery heart rate. We usually would talk about the differences between active and passive recovery, talk about how technically what we're doing is a passive recovery. And an active recovery, you think of typically is better if you're going to be working out again. So you might walk and open up the lungs after a run instead of just trying to stop and catch your breath. And so there's benefits for different activities to both. And so we just use that as an opportunity to talk about that. And so here's the protocol. The big thing here, I just want to highlight here, is that they have to maintain a heart rate at least 50 beats per minute above their ambient heart rate. So you can't really do this one until they know their ambient heart rate. Sometimes we would do the ambient heart rate assessment first. So check because it's different day to day, right? And so whatever your ambient heart rate is for that day, that's what you need to make sure you're 50 beats above. And let them set the intensity level. Either by some were flying by walking, some were jogging. I also like doing hollow runs. That worked out well. All it is a walk using a basketball court, and you walk one length, jog another, sprint, and they self-monitor, making sure that they're in the right zone. Okay. Oh, always something. All right. I don't know. We're back, I hope. Okay. So, all right. Heart rate recovery. Now, I really, this is fine to use this standard. Anything 20 or higher is, remember, the higher the better here. The first two, lower the better you can think of. Where recovery heart rate, we want a bigger number that helps that steepness, right? I will say with heart rate recovery, I don't really necessarily like some of the standards that are out there, especially for high school students, middle school students. What we really would use it for is to see how it changed over time. How that if we were in the middle, if an athlete was during the middle of a basketball season, or if we were in the middle of a cardiovascular unit, how it changed from week to week or month to month. And they can kind of see that improvement more so than say, okay, what's your fitness level? To me, I think that's a better way to use this. All right, max heart rate. Okay, so maximal heart rate, it's just the fastest your heart rate can beat in 1 minute. I want to be clear on this. It's based on many factors. A lot of people like to just say it's related to age. It's not actually really that accurate. It doesn't increase with training, so we're not really worried about, or we're not focusing on if we train harder, we can, increase our max heart rate. I will say individuals who have constantly trained, actually their max heart rate doesn't really decrease with age at all. That's why I say age isn't really as big of a factor as we think. But really what max heart rate is really helpful for is it helps us determine our intensity level, right? And it really helps us understand we can improve as with training, as we work out and we're focused on cardiovascular training, that we can work out in our max, close to our max or submax heart rate for longer periods of time. So we will notice that trend. So knowing that max heart rate does help us understand, okay, well, how close are we getting to that, and how close can we work out in that max heart rate? And so we would do 6 different tests, and plus there's a mathematical formula we can use. And the first time we would do it, we'd do all 6 just so we could learn and see the differences. Some of the tests, they would be spot on. They would get the exact same. Some were a little different. And then we would average them to just kind of get an idea. Anyways, they each have different advantages and pros and cons. You can Google each of them. I'm going to go over a couple of them here. I'm going to go over the step test because this during our heart rate lab day, this is the one we were doing. We had bleachers. Probably a lot of schools have bleachers, and this was really easy to facilitate. We could pull just one row of the bleachers out, or they're already out for the day, right? And after a brief warm up, they would just do a step test for 3 minutes, just going up, up, down, down, up, up, down, down. And we do a pace for 20 sets in 1 minute. I learned that when you're first doing this, it's good to use a video. So we use this 3-minute step timer, and it keeps that 20-minute timer. I had a metronome that works as well too. But don't assume that this even high school students can do or middle school students can do an up, up, down, down, and know, oh, this is 21 minute. You're gonna have to train them, scaffold that a little bit. Now we made this a partner activity when it was lab day. One partner we record every 15 seconds. It was too hard for one person to really try to pay attention or watch. Some were better than others, but I just found that this worked well. Some needed a break too. And what you do is the last minute, you average whatever they're, every 15 seconds, they'll have 4 data points. You average that. Sometimes you got to work about averaging, and you add their fitness level. So if someone had, an average of 150 and they were unfit, they would add 20. If someone had that same average of 150 for the last minute and they were very fit, they would add 40 beats per minute. And I wasn't really picky about what my students, they might say they're a competitive athlete, but you might not really fit that, well, no, you're not a competitive athlete. Not even on any of our sports teams. Playing We Fit does not count. Sorry. But I wasn't I'm not gonna, I don't know. It wasn't something I was worth, you know, if anything, we could have a conversation about it, but let's see here. All right, so mathematical formulas. Now, 220 minus your age is, I think, like industry standard. It works, it's simple, it's easy. I will say for middle school, elementary, even high school, I think it's fine. I will say by the time these students are 25, 30, it's highly inaccurate. They can be off by as many as 40 beats per minute. But especially for younger, it works. And I think for the public at large, it works fine. If I was a middle school teacher, elementary, and I wanted to use max heart rate, figure out what either intensity level or what it was, I'd use 220 minus your age. It works fine. But this formula on the bottom, forget if it's called it has a name for it. But I found that this works the best. It takes into not just age, but gender and weight. And it's more accurate for high school students. So now I will say no mathematical formula is going to be great. Those other tests are going to be way better. And you know, doing them over time and noticing the differences. And then you can put that into the Polar software, and that'll, you know, everyone can have an actual accurate max heart rate instead of an estimated one based on their age alone. So like I said, this works pretty well. I find this bottom formula to be more accurate, but you know, middle school, they don't have time to do it. But this works really well too. All right, heart rate lab days. So here is a heart rate lab day. They would partner up, and we got it down probably to a science. I think we would be done in 15 minutes, and we would measure ambient heart rate, delta heart rate, recovery heart rate, and we wouldn't always do max heart rate, but we would also do like SMART goal testing, some other things in there we'll talk about in a second. But it would only take about 15, 20 minutes. You know, about the same time that you might have spent on a mile run or a pacer test, less if you're doing the pacer, but you know, it worked pretty efficiently. You know, people were rotating through and getting things done, and you know, and now we have these other measurements of these other measurements of measuring cardiovascular endurance instead of just the pacer or just the mile run. And while we might do the pacer, you know, early on in the semester and at the end of the semester, you know, we could use this in between to kind of just see how training was going. And I think my students appreciated this a lot more. We also, like I said, I'm a big fan of using SMART goals, doing goal setting. So you can use SMART goals for anything. And so we would use them for ambient, delta, and recovery heart rate. And I will say you won't notice a lot of times a huge change in ambient and delta heart rate. And so sometimes students don't know what to shoot for. And so time's a big factor, but you know, if they're training, if you're having like maybe a 6-week training course, only expect ambient heart rate to change anywhere from, if they work really hard, you could say, it depends where they're at. If they're already at 60, right, that's pretty good. You know, they might, their goal might just be maintaining. And so, but you can get 2 to 4, as much as 10, depending where they're at. But that's 10. I don't think I ever saw 10, but 2 to 4 is more common. Same with delta heart rate. Like I said, 2 to 4. You're not going to see a lot of change here. And that's if they're working hard, if they're pushing themselves, they'll see that change. Or if they're starting out at a much higher delta heart rate, much higher ambient heart rate, they will see a change. Recovery, students would notice at least a significant gain. They could notice this a little bit more, you know, where this is a little bit harder, not as discrete as recovery. You know, they could see that change. Even with light training, they would notice sometimes their recovery heart rate would improve. Sometimes it improves just because they understand how to test it better. So I will say the first time we would do these a few times to make sure they understood how to do it. But just so in case, it comes up or they ask, what should I be shooting for? Like I said, we can have goals about maintaining too. That works fine too. This was good too because we would work on RPE, rates of perceived exertion. Not only we could estimate how many calories we would burn, but we could learn before I had heart rate monitors, we would do the talk test. And, if you could barely speak a word at a time, you were in your 9 to 10. If you, could talk a few words at a time, but not a whole sentence, then, you were at a 7, right? So students got pretty good at that, but now we could actually put heart rate data to that. And we would practice and say, okay, what do you think you're at? I think I'm at a 6. They check their heart rate. Yeah, I'm at a 6. Or no, I'm actually a little harder. So this feeling I have is more like a 7, right? And so they would get really good at using RPE that sometimes we wouldn't need to use heart rate monitors. Now, I don't know what their score is, but I would tell my students, okay, we're not using heart rate monitors, not a heart rate day, but now we should, today's lesson, you should be working between a 6 and an 8. If you're feeling like a 9 or a 10, you're going too hard. And so using that helps make the RPE scale a little bit more valid, more reliable to use. And the last thing I think we'll talk about today is pulse. And this is actually the first thing we would teach. So pulse is great to work on because when students, let's say a heart rate monitor is not working or whatever, the student didn't put it back on the charger from the previous class, you can still do those other protocols with taking a pulse. So if they get really good at taking their pulse, which our students did, don't always have to use the heart rate monitors. And so we would practice taking our own pulse, other students' pulse, and they got really good at it. And they could also see how accurate they were. They could, then we put on the heart rate monitors and then, measure, okay, well, there's a difference between a 6-second count, a 10-second count, a 30-second count. We do a whole minute count. I had students who really liked taking their temporal pulse. And I think they just like the look of, I'm smart, or, I'm thinking really hard. But, and so I will say we didn't really, when students were taking others, we would only do the radial, something about putting their hands around the carotid artery, pushing down on their neck. A lot of people weren't comfortable with that, and I would advise against it. And oh yeah, Google Drive. So I have a whole bunch of resources in here. And so this, pretty sure I'll figure out a way to make sure you have access to this, but I have just my different slides I would use, my handouts that I had here, the SMART goal templates, anything more than welcome to copy and share, use whatsoever. I'll also say, if you're looking for, there's a book called Heart Education. That's another great resource. If you want more, it's a great resource too. Human Kinetics sells it. But thank you. I hope you learned something, learned how you could use heart rate monitors more than just MVPA. Use them to assess cardiovascular fitness, endurance, and just use them as a teaching tool, as a training tool, as a conversation starter. And feel free, if you have any questions, my email, my contact is down at the bottom. And I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. And like I said, don't feel free to reach out and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you for attending the 48th Annual Elementary Physical Education Workshop. We're glad you were here.
Please follow us on our social media platforms. EPEW can be found on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.
Please check out our website for links to more great sessions. Just go to epew-cp.weebly.com and click on the virtual EPEW 2021 tab at the top and scroll down.
EPEW 2021 Educators Assemble would not be possible without the support and dedication from the amazing EPEW committee. The committee has been hard at work for months preparing for this workshop. Thank you to Linda McGee, Barbara Groton, Scott Wilson, Stephanie Sandino, Julie Miller, Jessica Monlux, Kayla Ailman, Shelby Lozano, Andrea Chavez, Scott Townsend, and Cindy Chase.
Thank you for attending EPEW, where our motto is, come to learn, leave as family.